tackling tax havens should be the number one priority. If we don't tackle tax havens this century, we're going to see the situation deteriorate. We're going to see inequality get worse. It's already bad enough. We're going to see social stability deteriorate. We're going to see a young generation face a future without any proper jobs. We're going to see increased struggles, including armed struggles, as social societies simply collapse around the world as a result of this. We face simple solutions. Either we strengthen international cooperation, or we face the breakdown of the world order. It's as simple as that. Now, in the last 50 years, the organizations which should have been tackling this problem, and above all, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, have failed. They have totally failed in the last 50 years to tackle this. The most recent attempt in 2009, the G20 leaders said, we're now going to tackle tax havens. And frankly, their efforts have been extremely poor. We'll only make change when public pressure forces that change. And that'll only happen when the public is made aware of how tax havens are an attack on them, on their future, on all of us. Because whilst 1% of the world's population has become extremely rich from using tax havens, 99% of us, most normal people, suffer either poor pensions or poor job opportunities or higher taxes or poorer public services or imposed austerity as a result of these places. They affect almost all of us. I'm John Christensen. I'm a director of the Tax Justice Network, which is a global network of researchers, financial experts, legal experts, economists like myself, working with civil society to help them tackle this phenomena, which we call tax havens. We cannot ignore tax havens any longer. We describe them as engines of chaos in the world's financial architecture. They are damaging financial security, they're damaging economic stability, they're damaging social stability, they're attacking democracy. So let's not think that we can ignore them. We cannot afford that. We have to take measures at national level, regional level, and international level, above all at international level, because tax havens have become a major, in fact, a core part of contemporary capitalism. In a world of globalized financial markets, capitalism has now mutated so that tax havens are right at the center of the economic system. So we cannot ignore them. There's no possibility of doing that. We have to take action. I think that there's a lot to be said for having many, many different initiatives, but at the same time we can't stand back and ignore what's happening at a global scale. The global markets are now dominated by transnational corporations. They have monopolies across most sectors around the world. And there's only a limited amount that we can do at a very small scale. Because of the nature of the markets now, we've allowed the markets to become highly concentrated. We've allowed wealth to become highly concentrated. And whilst I always applaud local activities and would prefer to buy locally and so on, we have to face the fact that we now live in a world which is highly concentrated, where power has become extremely concentrated, where our ability to act democratically has been under attack for a long time because these very powerful economic forces have created a political structure which they dominate, and our limits for our capacity for taking democratic action to protect ourselves is limited, in which powerful individuals and powerful corporations can stand outside our regulatory structures, outside our democracies, indeed by our democracies. So I think the scope for local action is rather limited, and what we have to do is to seek to regain power, that is, regain democratic control over our political systems and exert control over these extraordinarily powerful corporations. What Mrs. Thatcher did and what Mr. Reagan did in the 1980s, early 1980s, was to deregulate financial capitalism, liberalize capital flows. The depressing thing is we don't seem to learn from history, because you only have to look back to the 19th century, to the 1870s, when there was a complete financial market collapse, and again a repetition of that in the 1920s, to realize that deregulated financial capitalism leads to a series of crises. And these crises have been building up for a long time since Thatcher and Reagan deregulated the markets. They were an inevitable part of deregulated financial capitalism. And they've become increasingly destructive of wealth and, worse still, of democracy, because alongside the deregulation of capital, the free movement of capital has allowed capital to go around the world, escape taxation, escape regulation. It's shifted the cost of taxes from the rich and powerful, from powerful corporations, onto ordinary people. It's damaged public finances. It's increased levels of debt, both private, public, household debt have all risen enormously in the last 35 years. And we now face a crisis which is actually deepening, despite the measures of austerity here in Canada, despite the measures of austerity in Britain. Actually, the economic situation is worsening. It is clear that we have to take dramatic new steps, and part of that must be, first of all, to re-regulate financial capitalism, re-regulate the banks. Frankly, the era of tax havens must be finished completely. And we must move forward to a situation where we find ourselves able to control the bank's activities. Well, famously, it's been said that every revolution begins with the kicking down of a rotten door. The economic system that's been created, kicked off by Mrs. Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, it didn't come from nowhere. If you go back to the 1940s, after the World War II, a new economic system was put into order. We can call it capitalism version 2, which was much more tightly regulated, which had new global institutions designed to create global cooperation. The International Monetary Fund was originally intended to do that. The World Bank was intended to do that. And for the following 30 years, we had a period which is widely known as the golden age of capitalism. We had a capitalism which was regulated. We had a capitalism which was very highly taxed. The marginal tax rates in the United States and Canada and Britain were extremely high. Inequality was reduced. Growth rates were extraordinary. The markets didn't suffer from financial crisis. It's clearly possible to move to a completely different type of capitalism, as they did after the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944. All of that was swept aside by Mrs. Thatcher and President Reagan, and we now have this new world order of permanent crisis, deregulated capitalism. But it's perfectly possible to move forward to a new regime which has improved regulation, greater international cooperation. I'm not saying we need to go back to nationally based economies with no global trade or anything like that. That's not the issue at all. But you cannot have world markets, financial markets, in which there's weak transparency, weak international cooperation, and above all, where you have rogue states like Switzerland, United Kingdom, Austria, and others, which deliberately create tax policies to attack the tax policies of other countries. And I use the word rogue states because they are precisely that. They have been abusing their political power for many decades. They've been preventing cooperation, undermining cooperation, and to all intents and purposes, I think the United Kingdom government, the Swiss government, and Irish, other governments in Europe which host tax havens, they are engaged in economic warfare against other countries. And it's time that we recognized that, and we took steps to stop this economic warfare. We cannot have them attacking our democracy and our national sovereignty in tax matters.